This is a reaction to an article in the Globe and Mail. I'm going to try to avoid uh, other commentary and just do a strict narration. Um, I think I was mostly reacting to the idea that there could be ghettos in Canada. There are not ghettos in Canada, and so long as we prevent ourselves from Americanizing, there will never be ghettos in Canada. Um, we know how to fix that problem. And rather than suggest that Canada is just like America and we have the same problems, um, Americans should look at Canada for solutions because we don't have the same problems. One of the difficulties Canadians have in communicating with other activists and sometimes have in understanding the world outside of Canada is that poverty is not racialized here. We do have poverty, sure, it's a capitalist society. We also have areas that happen to be quasi-segregated by some combination of choice and market realities. People flock together. However, they're not at all correlated with each other. Some of our quasi-segregated areas are actually very wealthy. One of the reasons for this is that Canada actually has a pretty strict immigration policy that's focused very strongly around education. It's the Pearson Point Plan. In 1967, it's been modified slightly since then. But Lester B. Pearson actually won a Nobel Prize, and I deserved it. Yeah, very short minority government in the mid-60s that really changed the country dramatically. And our existing immigration policy is largely based around this. It was designed to make it meritocratic, or at least as best as it can be, but it is very strict. And the result is that our immigrants are actually the most educated members of our society. So when we let people in the country, we make sure that they're very educated. We don't care what country they're from, we don't care what skin color they're from, but you'd better have an education. You cannot come to Canada as a poor immigrant. We do not allow that. We don't care if you're white, black, yellow, we don't care, but you have to be educated or you cannot get into the country. Okay? And so Brampton is not a wealthy town in spite of its high immigration population, but because of it. It has very high education levels because it's full of immigrants. And our immigrants have high education levels. You can't come to Canada as an immigrant unless you have a high education level. And in fact, it's attracting a lot of investment because of it. We have areas in Canada that have a lot of immigrants that are very educated, and that brings in investment. It's actually pretty smart. And so if you drive through Brampton, you'll see a lot of corporate offices there. Engineering, technology, Fortune 500 Fortune 500 companies that are moving to an area with a high immigrant population because it's highly educated. And in a sense, it's almost a gated community. Okay, but that gate is about skin color. So to call it a ghetto, that's absurd. Canada does not have ghettos because we plan our cities to ensure that rich and poor neighborhoods are intertwined. Social engineering, smart social engineering that works. We have an effective tax system that distributes wealth properly from wealthy to poor. We build our communities this way because we understand that the issue is not race but class. We don't have a problem with taking money from wealthy brown people and giving it to poor white people because we understand that. I grew up in a welfare project that was sandwiched between wealthy developments. There were gates at the top of the hill. I can show you the pictures on Google Maps. But the geography prevented slumification of the area. The projects were really only a few houses at a time. For a while, my mom lived in the welfare strip while my dad lived in a 4-bedroom standalone. I'd walk through a path that took 5 minutes to walk back and forth. Okay? The only thing that separated the two properties was a public park. I remember forming teams to play soccer in that park. It was the rich kids versus the poor kids, just because that's who we knew, right? And we were very starkly aware of the class divide, okay? We knew that on the other side of the road were the rich kids, and because I went back and forth, I also knew that on the other side of the road were the poor kids, okay? But we used the same facilities. We kicked the same damn balls, we did it together, okay? So, no, Brampton is not a ghetto. But it will not stay how it is forever either. Canada will not allow this ethnic area to Canadians will not allow that. Okay, we will move white people in. We'll move poor white people in by building subsidized housing. And it will be good for everybody when that happens because it will break up an ethnic enclave, which we don't want. We want mixed neighborhoods, mixed race, mixed class, mixed language. That's how the country is designed to be multicultural, which means that people live together with different cultures in proximity. And it's all mixed up, and that's how we like it. Okay? I'm going to change my battery. I actually have a lot to say about this article, but I stopped reading when she said white people send their kids to private Catholic schools when they can afford it. I suppose I could have actually cut and pasted, but I didn't. In Ontario, we have a public Catholic school system, actually. It's very old. It's a historical relic of Canada being a francophone Catholic colony with a Protestant English ruling class. The solution was to set up two public school systems, a Protestant school system for the English and a Catholic school system for the French. Now, it was based on language, but they were both public school systems, both paid for by public taxes. Over time, the Protestant school system became a public school system, and the Catholic school system became bilingual to accommodate for Irish immigrants. But the schools are neither separated by class, nor by race, nor by religion. I went to a Catholic school. It was paid for by public funds. It was a public school system. There were Muslims in some of my classes. In fact, there were Sikhs in some of my classes as well. The technical rule is you're supposed to have a baptismal certificate before you can be let in. Okay, it's a public school system, public funds, but you need a baptismal certificate. Doesn't matter what color you are or what language you speak. It's are you baptized or not, right? But those rules are not enforced, really. If you go to a Catholic school in Ontario, you'll find Sikhs, you'll find Muslims. If the parents of those people want them to go to a school with a religion class, right? You'll actually find Protestants there too. The public school system does not have a religious component, so it leaves minorities with a choice, or non-Catholics, I guess, with a choice. Do you want to send your kids to a school that there's no religious instruction, or do you want to send them to a school that has a Catholic instruction, and you can kind of work it out from there, right? And a lot of non-Catholics in Ontario make the choice that it's better to send their kids to something with a Catholic instruction than to something with no instruction at all. In hindsight, I actually wish I would have gone to a public school. Anyways, I don't know why the piece was written, but it obviously was not fact-checked and shouldn't have been published. You can't do that, right? This is you might not realize it if you're outside of Ontario, but that's a really big error. Okay, it's a huge. It's totally wrong to think of the Catholic school system as a private school system. In fact, most of the political discussion around it is about abolishing it and merging it into the public school system because we think it's silly that we have two public school systems. It's just completely wrong. Okay, so it's attempting to understand Canada through the filter of internalized American racism and ultimately declaring that Canada must conform to a set of preconceptions rather than learning that those preconceptions are actually not supported by any of the facts. So you look at it and you say, well, that must be just like it. No, it's not just like it is in the United States. Okay, it's nothing at all like it is in the United States. America is fucked up. And it's fucked up because of its history, it's fucked up because of its governance, it's fucked up because of its philosophies. Your unique fucked upness is not transferable. The rest of the world does not have the problems that you have there because they don't have the fucked upness that you have there. No, not everybody is like you. You're the ones that are fucked up. And to try to understand the world through your fucked set of filters is just going to have you misunderstand the rest of the world. You're not going to have a deeper understanding of the rest of the world by applying the fucked upness of your country and the filters that have been created by the fucked upness of your country, by your fucked up history, by your fucked up social relations, by your fucked up government. Okay? So like I say, this is hard. I know I've been through this many times. Americans really think that America is the center of the universe and that everything is pretty much the same everywhere else. It's not true. The problems that you have in America do not exist elsewhere. And so they have a very hard time understanding that the vast majority of their problems are unique to their own history, to their failure of governance, to their economic system, and simply do not exist elsewhere, where they have different histories, different social relations, different governments. It's another example of the fallacy of universalizing the specific, but it's more so a consequence of Americans seeing themselves as the center of the universe. Regardless, okay, this is a Canadian newspaper publishing the idea that white people have private Catholic schools in Ontario. That's pretty bad, Globe. You should not have let that through. That's an example of bad editing. You, regardless of whatever, internalized nonsense this author is putting down on a paper, that should not have gotten through editing. You should not have published that, Globe. You're in Toronto. You know better. You should have caught that, okay? But it carries on with this process of projecting internalized racism, right? At the end, there's something about how Brampton might collapse into a ghetto if the immigrant population loses its source of low-wage labor. Wow. As though Brampton is like Chicago. I know quite a bit about the immigrant experience in Chicago because I've read about it. I don't think that this person has read much about the immigrant experience in Brampton. Okay. There are something that's widespread about it, like in Chicago, is you have undocumented migrants that end up living like they get these jobs with these placement agencies, right? The placement agencies act essentially as slave owners in the sense that the placement agencies will find you somewhere to live. They will pick you up in the morning. They will drive you to the warehouse, and then they will drive you home. And they will pay you something below minimum wage to do it. This is like who does all of this labor in the United States? That's who does it, right? And so I understand the perspective that the author is coming from, okay? But the idea of applying that to Brampton is so remarkably ignorant. You don't get it, okay? You cannot become an immigrant into Canada unless you have an advanced degree. That's one. Can speak at least one of the languages, that's two. And are determined to have strong market potential. So what she's thinking of in her mind, what she's describing, does not exist in this country. Canada does not have a low-skill, low-wage immigrant population because it does not admit immigrants unless they are highly skilled. I know, let's stop for a second. Has that clicked? Let's think about this. Let's read this again. Canada does not have a low-skill, low-wage immigrant population because it does not admit immigrants unless they are highly skilled. Whoa! That is so unlike the United States that you couldn't even imagine that, could you? How would I have to be fair, right? And I'm trying to be fair. This is a brutal takedown, and I get it, but I'm trying to be fair, okay? If you grew up in the United States, you couldn't even contemplate this idea that all immigrants are highly skilled, that we have no low-skilled immigrants because we don't allow it. We don't want it. We don't want to bring in low-skilled immigrants because we understand that there are social problems attached to that. And that might be considered very right-wing in the United States. But this is a confused kind of thing, right? Because who takes advantage of low-skilled immigrants? The big corporations, right? So who wants to bring in lots of low-skilled immigrants? It's the financial part of the 1%. And our immigrant policy, or our immigration policy, was not designed by the right. It was designed by the liberals, which at the time, it was the same time as the Great Society and everything. It was the 60s, and the Canadian left was, as it is today, quite a ways off from Lyndon Johnson. In the United States, you guys were trying to figure out how can black people vote, right? In the 1960s, right? It's crazy to think of that. In Canada, we were bringing in universal health care, right? Which you still don't have there, right? In fact, you could say very fairly that where the United States is now, you still haven't caught up to us to where we were in the 60s, okay? You're like 50, 60 years behind us in terms of social integration and in terms of government evolution. And 50, 60 is being generous. It's really more like 100 years behind us, okay? And one day, the left will have to, you will know that you've gotten over a hump on the left, okay? When it realizes that it doesn't help immigrants to let them into the country to work for half of minimum wage. That's not something that's progressive. To bring in low-skilled workers, have them work at half of a minimum wage, put people out of a job, that's not a progressive position, okay? That is unregulated, brutal hyper-capitalism. So because we don't have a system based on unregulated, brutal hyper-capitalism, we don't let in low-wage immigrants. The people that do those jobs in Canada actually get paid. Believe it or not. Amazing, isn't it? They have labor laws. I know. The jobs that nobody wants to do. Yeah, right. The jobs that nobody wants to pay anybody to do. If you're coming to India, coming from India to Canada, and we let you stay here, you are not working in a box factory. You have a PhD. Okay? Honestly, truly. Or at least a master's degree. You don't even get the form unless you've graduated from something or other, okay? So when we talk about immigrant populations in Canada, we're not talking about low-skilled, low-wage positions. We're talking about people at the top of a wage hierarchy. We're talking about doctors. We're talking about engineers. And if you look at the numbers, it comes out. It's right there. Right in front of you. StatsCan demographics, South Asians have the highest average income of any ethnic group in Canada. They're the wealthiest people in the country. Okay, so this is not a ghetto. When you talk about a South Asian neighborhood in Canada, you're talking about the wealthiest ethnic group in the country. And so areas where they congregate are some of the wealthiest places in Canada. Now, it's not old money, right? We're not talking about $10 million houses, but like if you look at like a neighborhood in like Westmount in Montreal, right? You'll have like a couple of $20 million houses, and then the rest of the neighborhood is So you look at like average. It's a good example of why average is not the best metric, right? If you look at median prices, Brampton is pretty high up there, right? And the reason why it's up there is because there's a lot of educated brown people there. I know. This is not America, is it? You're right, it's not America, it's Canada. It's a different country, different history, different social programs, different governance. So let your head explode. Realize that the whole world is not like America. That America is unique unto itself. That its problems are unique to itself. And that the problem in America is that there's no government. And the solution is that government matters, okay? And that America is not the center of the universe. I'm just going to close this off by being very explicit, okay? Absolutely clear. Couldn't be more clear. Let's be totally explicit. Let's use an example, okay? Let's say that you're a South Indian fellow. You're a young man from India. You want to come to Canada, start a business, start a new life. You know, you want to take advantage of the opportunity that exists in the new world, right? You don't speak the language well, but you'll learn. It's Canada. You want to come to a land of great opportunity, right? You don't have the money, but you'll work as a dishwasher for a while, and then you'll get a loan. This is how a lot of Americans think of immigrants, right? It's the classic American immigrant experience in the minds of most people. And as it was put there through a combination of 20th century propaganda, 19th century propaganda, modern film work, coming over to the new world to take advantage of the opportunities. Not even close. Okay? If it ever applied to America, that's fine, but it's not Canada. It never was. Canada will never let you in. Ever. Okay? Sorry to slash your tires there, but it's never going to happen. That's not how this country was set up. It's not how this country operates. It's not how this country works. It's not how this country will ever work. Okay? First of all, if you want to come to Canada, you have to be able to speak the language beforehand. You get two options, English or French, and we'll test you rigorously. It's not an easy test. You don't understand? Sorry, you can't come. You want to go to a country where you don't speak the language and you want to get a job, washing floors or something, and try to make your life. You want to go through that immigrant experience. Try the United States. They have lower standards. Try them. We don't do that here. That's not how our country is. It's not our history. It's not how we work things. Okay? So that's the first thing. You have to be able to speak English or French, or we don't let you in. Unless, if you're if your kids are here and your kids speak English or French, and you want to come spend the rest of your life with your kids, then we'll accommodate for that. Okay. But you're a young person, you want to start a new life no, that's not how Canada works. It's not how Canada has ever worked. Okay. Second, you actually need to have some money before we can let you in. We are generous, but you're not applying for refugee status, you're applying for immigrant status. We do have a different process for refugees where we are a little less stringent, and that's fine. That's the line over there. If you want that, go for it. But we're not going to let you in as an immigrant if you're not bringing anything with you. You would be a drain on the system. We have social systems here. See, that's the big difference, right? If you're in the United States, America is a country without any social systems. Let you in, you starve to death, that's your own problem, we don't care. Right, that's America, right? In Canada, that doesn't happen. In Canada, if you come in and you don't have anywhere to stay, we'll find you somewhere to stay. You can't afford to buy food, we'll give you food. But it doesn't really serve our interests to open up the country as, for universal welfare. Because we have limited resources, right? I think most Canadians would be would be ecstatic about universal welfare if we had unlimited resources. But we don't. We have limits, and we have to find ways to distribute things amongst ourselves. And we actually have programs designed to distribute things amongst ourselves. Because we have somewhat of a distributive economy, we have to be more selective. Okay? So that wouldn't be smart from our perspective. Again, if you want a country where, you sink or swim, if you come in and you fail and you die, that's America. That's not Canada. Okay? Next, you need to have some education. More than high school. If you want to come to Canada with a high school degree, it doesn't matter if you're from India or from Missouri or from England, you're not getting in with a high school degree. Okay? So, first, you've got to get a degree, and then once you do that, then you can call us back. Now, you could come to school here, sure. If you've passed the language tests and you have some money and you want to come to school here, you get in, you pass the process, great. Okay. But that doesn't mean you can stay here. You're probably going to have to go home afterwards, unless you find a job. Then you can stay, right? So the poor immigrant that has no opportunities because they don't have any education, that doesn't exist in Canada. I know it exists in the United States because you want your low-wage migrants to come in so that, corporations don't have to pay people to do things. But we don't do that here. People that work those jobs get paid. They have rights. And if you're going to come in, we need you to have an education. We need you to be able to fill a role. And we want you to buy property. We want you to succeed. Right? Finally, you have to have job prospects. Again, the classic immigrant experience of coming over, working a low-wage job until you save up some money. No. That's impossible. It's impossible in a debt-driven economy to begin with. This idea that you think you're going to come over and work in a field, it was never realistic, okay? And you can look at it from either perspective, actually. You can look at it from the perspective of that, we don't need this, we don't want this. You can also look at it from the perspective that we're saving you a lot of heartbreak. Because if you think you're going to come here and pick grapes for a year and then start a business, that's insane. Okay, that's never going to happen. We're saving you a lot of heartbreak. Okay? If you were to do that, you'd go home within 6 months and realize that this is not this is not Shangri-La. It's a capitalist economy, and there's a reality here, right? So but we actually check up on you too, right? You've got to be able to prove you have some kind of communication with somebody on the inside. We want documents. It's not just, that you have job prospects. You have to prove that you have job prospects, and we're going to call them, and we're going to be sure of it. And you're going to be in some trouble if you try to make something up. It's very strict. But note, we don't have any ghettos. So this is a familiar trick. We've got an article here claiming that Hillary Clinton opens up a double-digit lead over Trump nationwide. You can imagine the cheerleader that's giving you the news on that too. So it's a familiar trick. If you scroll down a little, you see the actual numbers. The Clintons at 40, Trump's at 32, and other is at 29. And then they mess with the numbers a little bit to create a double-digit lead because that's the headline they want. Right? Now, we saw this happen recently in Canada. The dynamic in Canada was an unpopular incumbent. His name was Stephen Harper, and two other guys that were seen as interchangeable. So the voting process was voting against Stephen Harper, but nobody knew which one was preferable, right? There were arguments both ways. The Liberals or the Bankers Party. Nothing ever changes when the Liberals win, even though that's not actually true. It's demonstrably false. And then, the NDP or the Party of the People, they're the Socialist Party, although that's, at this point, also demonstrably false, right? So, you ended up with all of this sort of movement back and forth, volatile polls, but the Conservatives were pretty stable. They only really seemed to, go up and down a point or two, somewhere around 32 or 33. And then, depending on what day of the week it was, to have the NDP around 29, the Liberals at 25, and then undecided at 13. The media report that as something like Conservatives 38, NDP 33, Liberals 29, and then undecided at 0. And the way you get that is you say, okay, if undecided is at 13, then you reduce the sample size to 87%, and then you divide out whatever's there by 87, right? So if you have the Conservatives at 33%, but you're only taking 87% of the sample, then you divide 33 by 87, and you get a 38. Unfortunately, most statisticians will tell you that that's not wrong because the undecideds, that 13%, should distribute equally. So you can essentially just remove them, reduce the sample size, and there we go. Unfortunately, I think that's a flawed assumption, and I think I was able to demonstrate that. Um, when they asked the undecideds who they were willing to consider, something like 90% of those undecideds said they'd never consider the Conservatives. So what you actually had was you had Conservatives around 33, and that's about what they ended up at. NDP around 29, Liberals around 25, and then you had undecided 13s were undecided, but they were undecided between the NDP and the Liberals. Right? So when you looked at that poll, just about any reasonable reading of that poll would suggest that the Conservatives were going to come in second place, and whoever got most of the undecideds, or even if the undecideds split, they'd still come in second place, right? But people just could not figure out if they wanted, Trudeau and the Liberals or Mulcair and the NDP, and it was like that for months, right? Sometime, I guess around August or September, the NDP actually took the lead. And you saw the undecideds kind of come down. Conservatives stuck around 32. Liberals went down a little. NDP went up. But it was because they were getting a lot of the undecideds, right? And even so, even when the undecideds were sitting around like 5 or 6, it was still clear, obvious that was what was going to, swing it. And then slowly the undecideds started swinging towards the Liberals. And a lot of, weak NDP voters ended up swinging back towards the Liberals because they didn't want the Conservatives to win. Three-party systems are more complicated. And in fact, I'd say a measurable amount of the error that I'm making in analyzing the U.S. election is because it's two parties. I'm used to analyzing a three-party system, right? So to me, a two-party system is what's strange, right? I know that to most people in the United States, a three-party system is absurd, but that's how it is in Canada. That's how it's been in Canada for a long time. In fact, we've had more than three parties for most of the last little while. And we may end up with 4, I think, in the next election. But you would ask the undecideds, and they'd say that, like 90% of them were between the NDP and the Liberals, meaning that the votes actually did not distribute. And in the end, that 13%, and a little more, actually went almost entirely to the Liberals, right? I got into a lot of arguments about it. The crux of my argument was that the data tells us that undecideds are leaning, and they're almost entirely sitting between the NDP and the Liberals. So this idea that you should just ignore that and distribute them was just ignoring data, right? In the absence of data, it might make sense as a base assumption, but if you have data, then you should not ignore the data. You should listen to it. And in the end, I was right, but I didn't ever really get the clarity from my opponents that I wanted. It's really still not clear to me that if they understood what they were doing wrong. So now we have a nice big chunk of 30% undecided in the American election here. That's a really big number. We're not sure yet whether there will be 2 or 3 or 4 major candidates, but we can state 2 things clearly. Okay, the undecideds will likely not distribute, so just reducing the sample size is a bad approach. But it's not a consequence of voters seeing 2 options as interchangeably acceptable, implying the need for the candidates to define themselves better, but the result of voters disliking both candidates equally. So you're looking at upwards of 30% of voters that are saying they want another option. That's unheard of in the United States. Undecided is running almost as strongly as Donald Trump is. Maybe there's some hope for America after all. And the second thing is that while it seems like both of the major candidates are being affected, it's Trump is being more affected. Meaning that while a good chunk of that undecided is on the left, it seems like it's mostly Gary Johnson. That said, if the Democratic primary is not over yet, right? In the end, we might see a three-way race. Clinton, Trump, undecided, all running around 35%. Yeah? So is Clinton leading by double digits? If you skew the data in a specific way, it might seem that way. But she should call Gary up and buy him a beer, because she's not winning as much as he's losing. They're both having trouble getting to 40%. So it's not something for her to celebrate or get complacent about, as it could and probably will change very quickly as Trump aligns himself with the Republican consensus. How long can this? How long can the Republican, the economic base on the Republican side, how long can it continue to be like, no, I'm not voting for him? Well, I mean, if Trump holds to this anti-trade line, it could be for quite a while, I think. But it strikes me as very unlikely to think that Donald Trump is not going to align himself with his party's positions. And it may end up being a whether he likes it or not situation. I still believe that the pivotal moment will come for when he decides who his VP will be. I think everybody should expect that he's going to, pull a Bush and pick a Cheney. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it is Dick Cheney, like literally. But I mean, it's going to be something like that, right? And at the end of the day, for all the talk of Trump being a megalomaniac, he's going to be a very marginalized figure in a Trump administration. It's going to be the VP that does everything. So, guys, we may even figure out who it is that's been pulling the strings all along. I think that's kind of what we figured out with Dick Cheney, right? Obviously, that's what I remember of the coverage around the year 2000. Was when Bush picked Cheney, it was like, oh, now we know who's been behind Bush the whole time. And I think that's what we're going to find out with Trump. And we should not be surprised when we figure out that it's a pro-trade establishment Republican, and Trump's positions totally align with everything we expect from the Republicans. And then all those voters come back, and then it's Clinton that's stuck, right? It's a lot of ifs, right? We still don't know what's going to happen on the other side of things. We can be pretty sure that Clinton's not going to hold on to a damn thing that she was floating around with Sanders supporters, which is why is Clinton stamping down on Sanders so hard right now? Because she wants to discard the hubris of the primary. She wants to come out in favor of the TPP. She wants to come out, et cetera, but she can't do that until Sanders is gone. So let's come down on Sanders as hard as we can. That's going to backfire, right? It's going to open up a huge vacuum on the left. So while Trump is going to, I went over this with my other, while Trump is probably going to be able to consolidate his base on the right by aping positions on the right, even though I think that's a losing strategy, is what he's going to do anyways. He's just going to align, right? Clinton is not going to be able to control her left, because her whole strategy is she wants to control the center. And it's going to be the left that we're going to see the big third party come out on in the end. The Gary Johnson voters, the people that are saying they're going to vote for Johnson right now, will go back. But the people that are very, very upset about Clinton will not. Right? I mean, there's a reason. I mean, it's... Well, actually, I guess Ross Perot was on the right? I don't know. Of course, if Trump surprises me and goes the other way, then yeah, you'll see Johnson come out, right? And you'll see someone on the left come out. But I think that's unlikely. I think that in the end, Trump will sound like every other Republican, and he'll control the space. But right now, you need to be careful when you're reading polls, because the polls that do measure undecideds are telling us that it's very big. So, whatever way it is that the media wants to fuck with the numbers, there's limited value in drawing much of anything from it, other than that people don't like these choices.